We are going to be talking tonight about the Canaanite woman who had a demon-possessed daughter. And it appears, if you read the story, that Jesus called her a dog. And that just bothers a lot of people. And it used to bother me. And I thought, okay, well, we need to look at this and see what in the world was really going on there. Because that doesn't sound like Jesus. So we're going to start. The account is found both in Matthew and Mark. We're going to start with Matthew 15:21. And going away from there, I'm going to read this from the Amplified Bible in both of the accounts. Going away from there, Jesus withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman who was a Canaanite from that district came out and with a loud, troublesome, urgent cry begged, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is miserably and distressingly and cruelly possessed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and implored him, saying, "Send her away. She's crying out after us." Jesus answered, and it appears he answered his disciples, not the woman, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and kneeling, worshipped him and kept crying out, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right or proper or becoming or fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, but even the little pups, the little whelps, eat the crumbs that fall from their young master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Oh, woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you wish." And her daughter was cured from that moment. Now, the reason I like it from the Amplified Version, I'm going to read from the New American Standard. A lot of people have the New International, but New American Standard says this: "When he answered her and said, 'It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' But she said, 'Yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table.'" So the very same word for dogs is used there. There's not a distinction between that the Amplified Version makes. Then we want to read from Mark 7:24. And it's the same account. Matthew tends to be much more brief in his telling of things. Mark often gives a little more detail. Again, I'm going to read from the Amplified Bible. Starting with verse 24. "And Jesus arose and went away from there to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He went into a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, but it was not possible for him to be hidden from public notice. Instead, at once a woman whose little daughter was under the control of an unclean spirit heard about him and came and flung herself down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by nationality, and she kept begging him to drive the demon out of her little daughter. And he said to her, 'First let the children be fed, for it is not becoming or proper or right to take the children's bread and throw it to the little house dogs.' But she answered him, 'Yes, Lord, but even the small pups under the table eat the little children's scraps of food.' And he said to her, because of this saying, you may go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter permanently. And she went home and found the child thrown on the couch, and the demon departed. So we're going to take a look at that. Have you all ever read that account and wondered, what does he mean saying to her, woman, you're a dog, and I can't, give you what belongs to the children. So this woman is a Gentile. She is a Syrophoenician by birth. And we can see from the text that she started following him, crying out, crying out, crying out. We've seen that before, haven't we? When people that were just urgent, they were desperate, and they just didn't stop. A couple of things that we need to remember right from the beginning here. First of all, this encounter with Jesus. Do you remember I've talked to you about how it's important that when we rightly divide Scripture, to rightly divide it, we divide it at the cross. Anything before the cross, before the death and resurrection of Jesus, is the Old Covenant. Even Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're not technically New Covenant books. They are kind of a bridge between the Old Covenant and the New, which began when Jesus rose from the dead. And so we have to remember that, and Acts tells us this, Ephesians tells us this, that Jesus was born under the law. Jesus was a rabbi. Jesus went to the temple and did what Jewish men and Jewish rabbis did. He offered sacrifice. He did all of the stuff that Jewish men did in the temple. He was a Jewish rabbi. That's important to remember. He was born under the law. He taught under the law to people who were under the law. The covenant of grace could not go into effect until Jesus went to the cross and died and rose again. What I think was sometimes kind of confusing to the disciples, and what kind of confuses us, is that even though Jesus was a Jewish rabbi under the law, he was the very personification of grace. And so he was beginning to bring the teaching of grace and the understanding that there is a new covenant coming. And it's not going to be anything like the old covenant. Under the old covenant, it is if you do this, then God will do this. Do bad, get bad. Do good, get good. Under the new covenant, we receive from God good because God is good, and it has nothing to do with whether we deserve or not, because we don't. That kind of simplifies things. Nobody deserves. So Jesus is at a point in his ministry here where the pressure from the Pharisees is just increasing exponentially. They are looking for a way to kill him. They're jealous of the crowds that he attracts. They hate his criticism of him. And so Jesus is taking his disciples into, it's the only time recorded in the Gospels that Jesus left Israel, which is kind of interesting. But he's taking them into another area to get away. Kind of a period of R&R, I think. Herod was out to get Jesus as well. He was jealous of his popularity. The Pharisees are trying to get him. A lot of Jesus' followers had left him because he was saying things like, if you don't eat my body and drink my blood, you can't be a part of me. And they're going, what in the world is he talking about? And the Bible is very clear that when he said things like that, many people left him. So his followers were confused. They were expecting him to be the kind of Messiah that rides in on a white horse and threw out all the whole Roman government and set up his own kingdom, and then his disciples could sit at his right hand and his left hand. And instead, he's talking about the Romans, forgiving the Romans and doing good to your enemies. And they just didn't get it. So at this point, when you look at what Jesus is doing, it appears that he's losing. It appears that he's losing popularity, he's losing followers, he's about to lose his life. So Jesus withdraws to give himself and his disciples some time to just engage in some private, intimate teaching. They are the ones who are going to establish the church after the day of Pentecost, and they need this time with him. So it says that they withdrew into the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, Tyre is about 20 miles from Capernaum, which is where he was before they walked that 20 miles to Tyre. It wasn't very far from Capernaum, but it was like another world. It would have been like stepping, if we could put, let's say, Weatherford and Las Vegas side by side, and step from Weatherford into Las Vegas. Oh, culture shock. I mean, there's just such a contrast. It was a Gentile world. There was idolatry of every kind, superstition, magic, worship of demons. Tyre and Sidon had been a part of Israel's history for a long time, and most of it was negative. There's a very famous woman that was a part of Israel's history that came from Tyre and Sidon. Her name was Jezebel. And I have never seen in modern, I don't know if anybody has ever named their little girl Jezebel. I can't imagine anybody would do that to their daughter. When Jezebel married Ahab, and kings married daughters of kings in neighboring countries and cities to build alliances with them, when Jezebel came into Judah, or into Israel, she brought with her a caravan of prophets of Baal. And we've touched briefly, I think, a time or two on when Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal there on Mount Carmel, and by the end of the day slaughtered either 400 or 850, and it doesn't say specifically, but I think it was the 850 number of prophets and priests of Baal. Jezebel was queen when all of that was going on. So Tyre and Sidon did not have a good relationship with Israel. And there was still a lot of Baal worship in Tyre and Sidon. There was some crossover between Tyre and Sidon and Israel, because it says, Mark 3:8, I'll go back to that real quickly. We read that and from Jerusalem and Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from Tyre and Sidon, a vast multitude, hearing all the many things that he was doing, came to him. So there were people coming down to Israel from Tyre and Sidon because they had heard of the great works that Jesus was doing. So even going there, and it said he went into the house and hoping not to be noticed, but it was impossible for him to hide. And so people came seeking his ministry. So he goes into the house, but someone saw him, and word spread like a prairie fire, and crowds began to gather. So this woman heard that he was there, and she certainly seemed to know who he was because she addressed him as Son of David. She called him Lord. Now, I don't think that she fully understood the implication of her words. She's a Canaanite. She's not an Israelite. She's from Tyre and Sidon. She hasn't had any teaching about all of these things. She has some knowledge. But there's no question that whatever she understood of Jesus, she understood that he could heal her daughter. And she was so urgently desperate to receive healing for her daughter that she was not going to give up. I like this woman. There's no mention of a husband. Normally, the husband in that culture would have been the one to seek Jesus out, but there's no mention of him, so she was likely a widow. So the Matthew account says that she began to cry out. And that word cry out means there was an urgency. She was loud. She was so annoying, in fact, that the disciples are finally saying to Jesus, get rid of this woman. Send her away. We came here to rest. She's driving us crazy. She's not going to quit until you tell her to go home. There's such agony in her voice when she cries out, my daughter is cruelly demonized. It's the same kind of thing that the man describes when he says, my son has a demon that throws him into the fire and obviously tries to kill him. And apparently the same kind of thing was happening to this little girl. The word little here does not mean a baby, but the idea is a toddler. Maybe 3, maybe 4-year-old little girl. Distressingly, miserably oppressed. This little toddler has this terrible oppression of darkness on her. Now, how does a 3-year-old child be demonized? My goodness. You know, this little girl certainly hasn't done anything to invite demonic activity. You know, we've talked before some about familiar spirits. We read about those in the Old Testament and in the New as well. And it's something that we don't give much credence to. We talk about haunted houses and we laugh. And we build haunted houses. Well, I don't, but people build haunted houses at Halloween time. And I don't know why people want to go in there and be frightened. I can't imagine. I have enough trouble keeping normal anxiety down without. I don't like things jumping out at me in the dark, so I'm not going to go in one, even if I thought they were just fun. Haunted houses. Of course, we hear that they're haunted by the spirits of the dead, the dearly departed dead, who didn't really go anywhere, and they come about to harass us or whatever. Anytime there is a haunting, and that is a real thing, we just need to understand that. It's real. But it's not the spirits of a dead person wandering around. It's demons. And particularly, you know, if you read histories of old castles in Europe, you read a lot about haunted houses. They're haunted castles. And that's where I think we get a clear picture of what these familiar spirits are about. Family lines who live the kind of lifestyle over centuries that invites the activity of demons will have demons that attach themselves to the family, and they will just, I mean, what a terrible inheritance from the past generation. But these familiar spirits will harass one generation to another, to another, to another. And it does appear that that's what has happened to this little girl. Now, it does not appear that the demonic activity came through her mom, because this is a woman who's seeking God. We don't read anything about her husband or this little girl's dad, but we might speculate that that came through her father's side of the family or from people on that side of the family. In the same way that someone who's using an addictive substance, crack cocaine is probably one of the most common when they're pregnant, can have a child that is addicted to crack cocaine at birth. So that is a passing of something along physically that is a bondage. These familiar spirits is the passing along of something that is spiritually bondage. Now, the good news for us is that because we are in Christ and Christ is in us, we don't have that problem. We have been set free from the curse. We have been given authority over the spirit realm. That's not something we have to fear, but it is something that we see that has occurred to this little girl here. Here's another thing that I might kind of put in here because I think it fits and I think it's important. Before the cross, again, dividing Scripture, before the cross and after the cross. Before the cross, there was no remedy for sin. They could offer sacrifices and temporarily cover over sin. But there was no remedy for sin. And before the cross, the human race did not have authority over the spirit realm. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd much rather live on this side of the cross. Jesus is the remedy for sin. And the price he paid on the cross took care of all sin. Past, present, and future. It is done. It is finished. Isn't that good news? And a part of that is also that he gave us authority over demons, over angels. We have that authority. So we live in a freedom that they didn't have any concept of at this time. Now, one of the first things that we notice about this dear woman, she had a lot of courage. Do you remember me saying before, and I'm going to probably remind us of this again, that every single person Jesus healed somewhere along the way had to do something that must have seemed absolutely impossible to them. This dear woman had incredible courage. Number one, she's a woman. She's a Gentile dog. Because that's exactly what the Israelites called them, is Gentile dogs. And the reason they called them dogs is because the dogs in their culture were like wild dogs that scavenged. They were scavengers. They kept the alleyways cleaned up. They cleaned up dead stuff. They didn't have a place to live. They didn't have an owner. God didn't recognize them. That fit an Israeli description of a Gentile exactly. So that's why they called them dogs. She's Canaanite. Her family tree is the most wicked people on the face of the earth. You remember back in the Old Testament when Canaan was a promised land, and God said, you go in there and you clean them out. You kill the women, you kill the children, you kill the men, you kill the animals. And we look at that and we're going, children and animals? Why? They lived in such horrific sin that the disease, transmitting such disease through their sin, and some historians, many historians agree that there was bestiality, there was the transmitting of sexual diseases to animals, that the whole region was so ravaged by sin and disease, and there was no remedy for sin. That in order to keep the Canaanites from destroying the entire human race, God had to destroy the Canaanites. It was a smaller version of Noah's flood, basically. There were a few Canaanites left, and she descended from them. That was her family tree. And so it took a lot of courage for her to come to a Jewish rabbi with her family tree, her history, crying out, Son of David, knowing he was the Hebrew Messiah, not hers. Have mercy on me. You know, I think that to the disciples, for this woman, to cry out those covenant words, because those are covenant words, and she was not in the covenant, must have sounded to her like it sounds to me when I'm in a store and I hear somebody say, oh, Jesus Christ. Oh my goodness. It's offensive. It's hurtful to me. And I think that's how it sounded to the disciples. Send her home. She has no right to be saying those words. Those are our words. Who does she think she is? Send her home. We want to rest. When she said, have mercy on me, the word mercy to any Hebrew person is translated into immediately, act toward me as you have promised in covenant. That's what mercy is. And she's not in covenant. They're saying she has no claim on the promises. All those beautiful words that she's saying do not belong in her mouth. And that's what the disciples were upset about. There's a really neat thing about this lady. In her crying out, she starts out with, have mercy on me. And then she says, my daughter is cruelly oppressed by a demon. And then she switches right back again to have mercy on me. And it's as though she sees herself and her daughter as one. And it's such a marvelous picture of intercession. Isn't that what we do when we stand for someone and we intercede? So she truly identifies with her child. So she's crying out with that urgent, agonizing voice. And Jesus did not answer her a word. Dead silence. That just seems so rude, doesn't it? I mean, don't we ignore people when we're just like, don't want to hear it? We're unresponsive usually when we're hurt or when we're angry or when we're annoyed. I think we talked about this one other time, that he did that when the blind men called out to him. Son of David, have mercy on us. Same exact words. And he didn't say a word. "Son of David, have mercy on us." They cried out louder and louder. And the people around him kept telling them to shut up. And then pretty soon he said, "Bring them here." And then all of a sudden, the people all around are all excited. "Listen, he's calling for you. Let us help you get over there." And their attitude changed very, very quickly. But why is he silent? It's important that we understand that, so we don't think that Jesus is just being insensitive or unkind. Just as it was with the blind men when he called them to himself and said, "What is it you want?" Which seemed like such a foolish question when you have two blind men standing in front of you saying, "Have mercy on us." "What could I want, Jesus? I want to see." Okay, now we're getting to. He wants them to be very, very specific. But one of the reasons, and this is a possibility, it doesn't say it in the text, but I said a little bit ago that the whole region of Tyre and Sidon was full of magicians and people like Simon the magician that did magic tricks and called them miracles. And if he had just answered her request, a touch of the hand, a word spoken right there, he very likely would have been put into that same category of magician. One who, as the Pharisees accused him, casts out demons by the power of Satan. And so it was important that Jesus draw her faith out so that in their interaction together, it would become clear by whose power the healing was going to occur. All of us have had the experience of being in a difficult place, and as that difficult time kind of stretches out, the emergency feels stronger and deeper and harder. And what does our faith do when we don't get a complete answer, perhaps, to our prayer all at one time? We have two options, don't we? We can get our roots down deep, 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 deep into the power of God and rest there. Or we can become bitter and angry toward God and say, "Well, he doesn't listen anyway. Why even bother?" And what Jesus is doing here, I believe, is to give this woman's faith an opportunity to strengthen. Faith is always birthed in an emergency. Always. And it grows when the emergency, when the hard time is extended. It's easy to say, "Wow, I just think it would be so cool to be raised from the dead." Or, "Well, you got to die first. That's not the fun part." Or, "Wouldn't it just be so cool to see Jesus still a storm?" Yeah, but you got to be in a boat that you think is going to sink. And so, yeah, the miracles are wonderful. But none of us want that time before the miracle occurred. That's the hard part. And so Jesus, in being silent to this woman, is in a sense letting the emergency become stronger. And it gets stronger because now the only person she believed could help her doesn't seem to be responding. I like this woman. She didn't quit. She kept crying out in her loud, urgent voice. And that's when the disciples turned to Jesus. So now Jesus has got the woman on one side crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. And on this side, the disciples are going, send her away. She's driving us crazy. Jesus stands in the middle. And I think it's interesting. We can see that he's on her side because he doesn't send her away. He could have. He had the authority to do that. But it's kind of interesting. It says that his disciples keep on saying, Lord, send her away. Lord, send her away. He's obviously not answering them either. He is standing in the middle of all this racket, not talking to anybody. The only response he made was when he said to the disciples in her hearing, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Not a rejection of the woman, it's a statement of fact. You know, we have talked about in our study of covenant and in our study of the Old Testament that we see way back there in Egypt, the descendants of Jacob, now called Israel, the Israelites were chosen, God's chosen people. And they were chosen for this one thing, to bring Jesus into the world so that through the seed of Israel, the whole world could be blessed. So Jesus is simply stating, I came to the lost sheep of Israel because in coming to Israel, through Israel, the whole world will be blessed. Now, we've studied Romans enough to know that Israel is now us, the church. Those who believe Abraham's descendants by faith. Romans 3 and Romans 9 very clearly states they are not all Israel who descend from Abraham, but the church. And so he's simply reminding them of that fact here. I think another illustration of this, because Son of David is so tied into his coming as shepherd to the sheep of Israel, that when she cried out, Son of David, I think it's kind of like if we hear somebody with purple hair quote John 3:16, we were just going, no, that doesn't match. That's not right. So Jesus said, if we don't understand that greater context, we might think from what Jesus said that he said to this woman, well, that's too bad. I didn't come for you. The Hebrew people were to receive the promises of the covenant, tell the whole world what the law of God was really about. The nation of Israel brought the Messiah into the earth, and when Jesus came, they fulfilled their calling. Now, Jewish people, just like Danish people or English people or African people or whoever people, all must, one at a time, individually say yes to Jesus the Messiah to be brought into the kingdom. So now this woman is approaching Jesus using covenant language, and she's not in the covenant. She does not have any promise on which to base her request. She doesn't have any basis for her claim. But it's so amazing to me how she just keeps following him and won't go away. She's incredibly persistent. Many would have walked away. But she bows and she worships him. And there's indication in the Greek text that she was stretched out on the ground, holding onto his feet, worshiping him. You know who that puts me in mind of? That woman who wandered in off the street with the container of expensive perfume, that broke the bottle and poured it on Jesus and cried so hard that his feet were wet with her tears. This woman is determined that she is not going to go until her daughter is well. The word worship means worth-ship. It is an acknowledgement of the worth of the person that you worship. Our word worship is kind of a contraction of that word worth-ship. And basically, in her worship of him, she is saying, because of who you are, you must hear me. You will hear me. You can't turn a deaf ear to me because of who you are. You are compassion. You are mercy. I think we could learn a lot from this pagan woman and her worship of Jesus. So Jesus said, let the children be satisfied first, because it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. The children, of course, are the covenant people of Israel. And they lived just down the road, and he said, I came to feed the covenant children. It's not right that I would take their food and throw it to the little pet house dogs. It's important that we say little pet house dogs, because the word dogs that the Jews applied to Gentiles, Jesus did not use that word, but that doesn't come across in most of our English translations. Jesus used the word for little puppy. He actually referred to a treasured house pet that hangs around the master's table. In this description, he's saying they are cared for, they eat well, but they have to wait till the children sitting at the table are done eating. Now, isn't that a different picture than, you dirty dog, get away from me? I know you have a couple of little dogs. Anybody else have a little house dog? Yeah. And the fact that little dog is a dog doesn't mean you don't take care of it. For some people, the way to get the most attention is to show up at the house as a stray dog. And you'll get the best care. So Jesus does not say, I will not heal your daughter. He's simply saying, at this time in history, I'm feeding the children, and when the time comes, you'll be filled as well. When the children have been fed, you'll be fed. He was probably setting aside that Pharisaical prejudice against the Canaanites and the Syrophoenicians, that they were unloved and eternally rejected. You know, the Pharisees were very prideful. But what Jesus said to the woman was, I call you a little pet puppy, not yet a child, but you'll soon be invited to sit at the table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Oh, if the Pharisees heard that, oh, they'd really be upset, right? But that dear woman heard what he said. and listen to her response. Okay, call me a puppy. But even the puppies get to eat the scraps. I mean, stuff falls off the table, and whatever falls on the floor, whatever is available to me, call me a puppy. I don't care. I want the scraps. What a humble woman. What an expression of faith. She knew that one crumb under that table was enough to heal her daughter. One crumb. That's all she needed. One crumb. When Jesus said she could be fed later, in a very real sense, what she said was, well, you don't know this, Mama Puppy, and I'm not going to wait that long. I know there are scraps under that table. You have too much to have used it all up for the children. I know there's more. I know you have more love. I know you have more power. I know you have more grace to be shared in the promises. Your provision is so vast. I know you didn't use up everything you have feeding the children. You didn't exhaust your love. It's not exhausted. You have plenty more, and if I have to wait for a full meal, fine, but throw me some scraps right now. My daughter needs a scrap. I know that one scrap is enough to throw out that lousy demon. It was her answer. Yes, Lord, I know that. But even the dogs, even the little puppies, enjoy the scraps. And Jesus said, because of that statement, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter. And he says it shows great faith. That word great there does not mean great in quantity. It doesn't mean that she gathered up a lot of faith. It means the quality of faith. Her quality of faith. Another time that Jesus said the same thing in Luke 7. I'm going to read verses 2 through 10. You'll remember this story because I know we've talked about it. A centurion slave who was highly valued by him was sick and about to die. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come to his house and save the life of his slave. Now, we talked about how unusual this centurion was. Number one, that he would love his slave was just unheard of. And he's a Roman centurion. He's a Gentile. He's not Jewish. But he comes to Jesus for help. So the Jewish elders, because this centurion had built a synagogue, he loved the Jewish people, apparently. So the Jewish elders came and were going to intercede to Jesus on his behalf. And they said, he's done such good things, he is worthy for you to come and help him. Because he loves our nation, he has built us a synagogue. Well, Jesus responded to that. He went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to tell him, Lord, don't trouble yourself. I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But simply say the word. Just say so, Lord, and my servant will be healed. For I too, he understood how Jesus operated. He said, I too am a man under authority. I operate under the Roman government. And because I am under their authority, And I am backed up by the whole Roman government. When I say to this man, you go, he goes. And when I say to this man, you come, he comes. He recognized that Jesus operated under the authority of his Father. And because he had submitted to the authority of the Father, that Jesus could say the word and that sickness would go. And Jesus, when he heard this, was amazed, and turning to the crowd of Israelites following him, said, I tell you, I have not found so great a faith in all of Israel. Another Gentile. Isn't that amazing? And when those had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. Jesus said his faith was great because he understood the authority of Jesus. Now this Gentile woman is identified as having great faith because she understood that God's love existed prior to the law and prior to the old covenant. She understood that. You know, we listen to nations making covenants, and we listen to treaties being made and signed, and really important people sign their names to these treaties. And they make those treaties to try to get the other country to treat them with respect and honor. The conditions of this treaty is going to force that country to honor us and be respectful to us. It is exactly backwards to what God does. God is love. He makes a covenant so that we can see how loyal and tender and gracious and kind he is. He doesn't enter into covenant with us to try to make us hold him to that, or for him to hold us to that. The covenant he makes is to show us this is what real love is like. Wouldn't it be great if countries could make that kind of a covenant together? I've proven myself to be trustworthy and honorable, so let's enter into this covenant together. The Canaanite woman had no credentials. All of her ancestors worshipped the devil. She lived in an idolatrous, demon-infested country. Her ancestors were enemies of God, enemies of God's people. And yet, she saw the love of God. She knew she was hopelessly dependent on the compassion of Jesus. And she clung to his feet and would not give up. I like this woman. It's kind of a fun thing to realize that by the end of this interview with Jesus, when he says to her, go your way, your faith is great, your daughter is well, she has become an Israelite. Because what makes a covenant person? Faith. This woman came to him with all of that baggage and all of that ugly in her background, and when she left, she was a daughter of Abraham. I just think that's a pretty cool thing. I thought about some other people, Rahab, Ruth, that came into the Israelite nation by faith. Rahab was a harlot living in Jericho. Ruth was a Moabite. a descendant of an incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. Didn't matter. They believed the promises of God, and when they believed the promises of God, they were received into his chosen nation. The last part of the Mark account says that she went home and found the child. I was going to see what it says in New American Standard Bible says lying on the bed. Lying on the bed. The Amplified Bible has it right. King James says laid upon the bed. She went home and found the child, and this is a violent word, thrown on the bed. And it's like the last thing that demon did as it left was just threw that child. But it had to leave. And she came home, and there was her child thrown on the bed. And can you imagine her joy in gathering her up and seeing this little 3 or 4-year-old child happy and normal again? We're not told how long she struggled with that demonization. It sounds like most of her little life. What joy she must have had. I think it's so important that when we read these accounts of how Jesus interacted with people, and we read something that sounds like Jesus being inconsistent, distant, rude, I don't know, those 3 words would cover a lot of things. That we dig a little deeper into the background of that story, because Jesus cannot treat people with rudeness or unkindness or in an inconsistent way, unfaithful way, ever. He will not. And so when it appears that way, we need to find out what's really going on there. You know, I used to read when Jesus, there on the cross, said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." If in our culture somebody says to us, "Well, woman," it's kind of rude, isn't it? If we look back into the history of that word woman is the word that's used in Genesis when God separated woman from man, and instead of calling them both Adam, said Ish. Here is Isha. Isha is woman. And it's a term of great respect and honor. And that's what Jesus said to Mary, Isha, behold your son. I mean, one of the last things he did was to make sure that his mother was cared for. Knowing the character and the love, the gentle mercy of Jesus is so important when we read what we read, because if we read it through our own grids, we're going to misunderstand a lot of times what he said and what he did. So I think it's a fun thing to know that what Jesus said to that sweet woman was, I mean, the context was a well cared for pet puppy, not a dog. That's a really important thing to know.